So we've talked about one-to-one time. It doesn't necessarily have to be a board game, although, if I might put in a couple of shameless plugs, not only is Candyland a good mindless game, but Uno, if you know Uno, the best thing about Uno is you can reverse cheat. So if you have a kid who has a low self-esteem and needs to be built up, there's plenty of ways you can cheat to make him the winner, him or her the winner. So Uno and Candyland are probably our most popular two therapeutic games in the office. But it doesn't always have to be a game. In our family, when our kids were young, we had this thing where once a week I took one of the kids. Here in Colorado, you don't have Waffle House, do you? Oh, you do? Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. So for those of you in other countries, Waffle House is a chain of cheap, disgusting, yet strangely compelling and really good breakfast food places where you can get served pretty quickly. So our habit was every Friday morning I would take one of the kids to Waffle House before school. Now, we felt so strongly about the importance of that one-to-one time that it was never taken away as a punishment. We could never use, if you don't do this, you're not getting to go to Waffle House on Friday. So it was a given. Now, you have to keep in mind that these one-to-one times don't always have to be discipling times or an interrogation or a moral lesson. Some days we went to Waffle House and we just sat there and looked at the rest of the people, or we talked about the food, or we talked about who knows what, We live in a pretty small community, so usually someone we knew would walk in or something like that. So it wasn't a big deal. Not a big deal. And the food is by no means anything to, be motivating, but it was such a big deal to the kids, this Waffle House, just the one-to-one time. No lessons, not always. Now, sometimes it was how come you're not doing this, or why are you doing that? But usually not. It just became so important to them, that one simple thing. Speaking of simple things that you can do to facilitate communication, I want to talk about dinner time. There is interesting research, abundant research, coming out about the importance of families eating together. The research shows that families that eat dinner together at least several times each week, children have higher grades in school, lower rates of drug and alcohol use, and are less likely to be engaged in early sexual experiences or delinquent activities. Can you believe that? Just a simple alteration in your family environment, eating dinner together. Now, we know the reality. There's soccer this night, there's drama class next night, there's dance next night, but at least a couple of times a week, a family dinner reduces the risk of all those terrible things. You may find that hard to believe. I brought proof. Look at this. There's one page of studies, and these are from different journals and different disciplines. All of it, here's page 2. You don't have to look at them all. I can make these available on request, or if you get these slides online, you'll have access to these. And here's a third one. 3 pages, and there were more. This is just where I figured PowerPoint would not tolerate me doing more of this. 3 pages of studies from different disciplines. Some of it is from American Academy of Pediatrics. Some of these are from Journal of Psychology of Addictive Behaviors, Journal of Adolescent Health, Journal of Marriage and Family. The ones I didn't include were somewhere from like the Journal of Dietary, there's abundant research to support the importance of dinner times in the psychological development of kids. Just dinner time. So what I'm telling you is you don't have to be Sigmund Freud to facilitate communications with your kids. One-to-one time and simple routines like dinner time. Now, a lot of these are multivariate studies. In other words, these studies looked at all factors that contribute to juvenile delinquency, sexual misbehavior, declining grades in school, all the factors. What your parents do for a living, whether or not your parents are in a married household, poverty and income levels. Of all those things that contribute to the behavior of kids, dinner time turned out to be one of the most important. Such a simple thing. So that's why I felt justified in bringing 3 pages of references to prove it. So make the most of meal times. Don't use meal times to interrogate or correct always, right? It's just a discussion. Everyone's trapped around the dinner table. Everyone's got to eat. You can just have a discussion. We'll talk about this a little bit more later, I think. We decided we would start we tried doing Bible lessons for the kids when they were little in the conventional Bible talk format, which is we'd lay out a thing on the carpet and come up with a complex Bible lesson, and we'd all sit still and we'd sing, pray, read something out of the Bible. That would go for about 8 seconds before someone nudged somebody else or started a fight or, So we scrapped that idea. That's not working. We decided to use family meal times in an advantageous way, not by having a complex Bible lesson, but maybe coming up with one little scripture we talk about. This started a family mealtime thing. Before long, the kids got so into it that at one point they said, "Dad, how come you always come up with the mealtime Bible talk thing? We only did it like once a week." They said, "Why can't we start doing them?" I'm like, "Go for it. You want to lead a Bible lesson during dinner time?" So the kids got into it. It's just the importance of this one simple routine. The point being, connecting with your kid, communicating with your kid doesn't have to be a complicated thing. You make the most of little opportune times, walking the dog together, having dinner time, playing a game, windows of opportunity. And some of our best talks, to tell you the truth, happened while we're in the car, just in the car, going to school or something like that. We have 2 girls and a boy. Our son was easily the least communicative, but he would talk in the car for some reason. You could interrogate him in any other setting, and he wouldn't talk, but for some reason, just riding from here to there, he would ask a complicated question, about. So short, opportune times to talk. Don't burden yourselves with thinking that every moment has to be a major lesson or theological thing. They're not cognitively prepared for it, and you don't need to. Just to communicate with your child is pretty easy in a one-to-one setting.
As your kids mature and kind of their family dynamics change, you may have to rethink how to do this with some of your kids. What happened in our family, the oldest 2 were 18 months apart, so they were back-to-back in school. So they graduated high school 1 year after the other and went to college. And so we were left with this 3rd child, who is about 4 years younger. And she is our busy person. I was telling somebody she's always someplace in the world that we don't know where she is. She's our missionary So in high school, she had her driver's license, and she was involved in all the teen activities at church, and she was involved in school stuff, and she was in the marching band, and she was and she was the only one home at that time. And we didn't want her sitting at home in the den with 2 old people all the time. We didn't want that, but it dawned on me that I'm not getting enough communication time with her. I'm not getting as much, when it was the 3 kids at home, everybody came home, it was kind of built in. But with her, she was out doing these great things someplace else, and I had to think, okay, we need a little more connect time somehow. So what I did with her is I said, why don't we get together? We have a little local coffee house that's about a mile from our house. And I said, why don't we make a time, one afternoon every week, that we go to the coffee house and we'll just have coffee together. And so we set a date. It was Thursday. We met on Thursday afternoon at the coffee house. And she thought this was really cool because this is what I would do with sisters from church, is have coffee time with them, And so we had a standing date, every Thursday afternoon, and we would sit there for hours, and I would hear about school, and I would hear about things she was concerned about, and I would hear about things she was excited about, and, we got that time. So all I'm saying is you have to remake this as your kids mature, okay? You can't do the same thing you did when they were 9, when they're 16, or you can't do the same thing, when you got 3 kids at home as when you have 1 kid at home. You've got to constantly think about, am I still connecting with this child? Am I still getting that time with this child? Now let's talk about some other ways to communicate with your child besides just verbally. Nonverbal communication with our kids is very important. And I'm talking about things like physical affection. When our kids are little, when they're 2 or 3 years old and they're all sweet and cuddly, it's pretty easy to do. You sit down in a rocking chair and they sit on top of you and you hug them and you read a book and, it just kind of naturally happens. But you get a boy in middle school and it doesn't naturally happen that you're getting that physical affection with them. As kids get older, we can let that fall away if we're not careful. Our kids need physical affection from us. There's some research that says you have to have a certain number of hugs every day to stay healthy, and I don't remember what it is, but they don't get it at school, okay? They don't get it at school. So if we're not providing it at home, if we're not showing them physical affection at home, it's much more likely that they're going to get it someplace outside, all right? Like early sexual experiences. I think dads especially, I think this is super important. Your kids need to know that you love them, and they need to have that physical presence. Now, you may, again, if you've got a 13-year-old boy, you may have to run him down in the hallway where nobody sees and give him a hug, but he still needs it. He still needs it. So we've got to be conscious of that. One of the things that's very simple that we often forget with our kids is eye contact when we're talking to our kids. If you and I have a conversation as an adult with each other, we're going to have eye contact, right? Right? But as parents in our homes, what we do is we're doing something else while we're talking. We talk at our kids and not to our kids. We're busy, we're doing the dishes, or we're, doing whatever, and we kind of talk over our shoulder to our kids. There's a different emotional connection when you're talking with someone and making eye contact than when you're talking over your shoulder to someone. So again, it means we got to quit what we're doing. We got to put down the cell phone. We got to stop whatever's happening, and we got to turn around and really communicate with our kids, really focus on communicating with our kids. We've also got to directly communicate our love and praise to our kids. They need to hear, especially when they get to pre-adolescent, adolescent age. The world is telling them everything that's wrong with them, right? Their classmates will tell them everything that's wrong with them. Their teachers a lot of times will tell them everything that's wrong with them. They need to know what's going good with them. They need to know what's special and important and precious about them. And it needs to be specific. It's not just, oh, you're such a great kid, all right? That doesn't go very far. But, honey, I noticed how compassionate you were toward your friend that's having a hard day, and you have a really compassionate heart. That's very special. Most people don't have that. Our kids need to know what is special and unique, what God-given gifts they've been given, because if we don't tell them, the world is not going to tell them that. So we need to make sure that we're telling them that. We also strongly believe they need to know what their weaknesses are. In our house, we called it favorite sins, your favorite sins. And they knew that mom and dad had them too. It wasn't just them. But, honey, you can be really prideful sometimes. And I'm afraid if you don't deal with that, that's really going to hurt your relationship with other people. Or you can be, we had one that was manipulative. She knew the word manipulative by the time she was about 5. People don't like feeling that way, that you've manipulated them. So you've got to watch that. That's going to be something you've got to watch. So they need us to help them see what their Achilles heel is going to be as well. If you're not good at verbal praise, practice. It gets easier with practice. If you're really not good at it, go to the drugstore, get a little box of cheap cards, and write it down and stick it under their pillow or stick it in their backpack so that they, it's really interesting. We're cleaning out this house. We're moving, and we're cleaning out this house that we've raised all our 3 kids in for 29 years. And I'm finding stacks of these cards that I've written my kids from years ago. A lot of them they kept. You think it's not that big a deal, but it is a big deal. It is a big deal. So if you can't do the verbal praise, do it some way. Get that information to them some way.
At this point, I feel like I need to clarify the last point on that slide. If you can't sense it, I was getting a little frustrated with PowerPoint after hours of preparing these slides. So I had the nonverbal communication thing, and then I got to words of praise, and then I got upset with myself. So forgive me. That was a little internal tirade. I apologize. That concludes what we want to talk about, communication in parenting. The next class we're going to talk about is one we're very passionate about and want to maybe give it a little extra time. So for the next maybe 5 minutes, I'm going to have Mary come up. Do we have any other questions, comments, points you'd like to make about communication with kids? Yeah. I don't know. I have no idea. Like, would it be the same about breakfast time if we had breakfast time as a family? I don't know. There's something beats me. If we could read through all those references, we'd find that there's something magical about dinner time. I expect that it's at the end of the day, everyone has things to download from what happened in the day. So it's the one time we can all process things together. So I imagine it has something to do with that. The question, by the way, was, is there something in particular about dinner time versus other times, as long as it's times that the family gets together? Did you want to add to that?
No, there is research like for juvenile delinquents and things like that. There's research that talks about if you increase the parental supervision, that you reduce the delinquency behavior just by increasing parental supervision. So I think there's kind of an accountability that goes with dinner time too, that the kids know you're going to be eyeballing them at the end of the day, and you're going to kind of know, you're going to pick up the vibes of what's going on, definitely with stuff. I think that's why it reduces addiction behaviors, is if that child knows I'm going to sit down with mom and dad at 5:30, they're much less likely to be drinking in the middle of the school day or something like that. So I think there's an accountability factor that goes with that as well.
Yeah. Right. That's an excellent point. So the point was kind of by extrapolating to our church family, the importance of, we have communion, which is nominally a meal together, but it really doesn't tend to be that way. I've often wondered, why did God make us so we had to eat? He could have made us photosynthesize like plants, and we would never have to eat. I think God made us to have to eat. So at least 2 or 3 times a day, we'd sit down together and do something together. I think that's an excellent point.
We have one of the elders in our church in Athens has gotten really into this idea of the communal meal at church. And we've had a couple of those. And it's been real interesting because I know I've had a couple of conversations that never would have come up in just a regular church service and fellowship, that because we sat down and we ate together, they talked about something that was going on, that I don't think would have happened if we had had a regular service and this last song and, out the building. Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's a great point. Maybe we can expand this to our church families, dinner times together. Yes? Right. That's right. So take everything we say with a grain of salt, because we know their realities are different for each family, I think the overriding point is something together. Now, yeah, when you've got toddlers or infants, that's not going to be practicable. That's not going to be easy. But it's just something, at least with your cognizant kids, maybe after the infants and toddlers go to bed, maybe you can have dessert time with the older ones. So did you want to add to that?
I mean, families are all different. There's no one size fits all, So I think you've got to figure out, like we were talking about family devos. Family devos were a disaster for us for a long time, until we figured out how it worked for our family, So I think you've got to figure out what works for your family. And I was just he mentioned the dessert. I remember when our kids were little, he had just opened the practice. He was working long hours. I was trying to feed 3 little kids and get them to bed. But I wanted them to see Daddy, you know. And I remember a sister saying, go ahead and feed the kids when they're hungry, and then dessert is with Daddy. When Daddy gets home, you have dessert. And so we did that for a while, and that worked well. So I think figuring out what works for your family is what you've got to do.
Even we had another ritual where one evening, Friday evenings, when the school week was over, we'd get a blanket. There's a big blanket. We called it picnic blanket. We'd roll it out on the floor in front of the TV, order pizza, and we had pizza and a movie night once a week. So, you know, an infant can be asleep by then, or a toddler you can put to bed. And that became a big deal. In fact, the kids would fight. We kept the blanket in the closet, and kids would fight about who got the blanket out of the closet, you know. So just anything, routine, ritual is great for kids. Any other? In that case, we're going to take another break, and we'll get set up for our very interesting class, I promise, about discipline, biblical discipline. Thank you.